Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Oh, you're back for more? Well, here we go. Now it's time for Pedigree's Part 2, the continuing story. All right, so we talked about recessively inherited genetic disorders in Part 1, and we're actually going to talk about how you can get a dominant genetic disorder in this part and some other stuff. So we got to get going. Okay. So dominant disease is transmitted to offspring if at least one parent suffers from the disease and lives long enough to reproduce. Okay. So dominant alleles also arise from new mutations in the DNA of sperm and egg of unaffected parents. And there are interesting mechanisms that can create a dominant allele. It seems like, kind of an odd thing for a genetic disorder. A lot of the times, the dominant allele codes for an abnormal protein that interferes with the function of the normal protein. So it's not like you don't have the normal protein there, but it makes it not work. It somehow inactivates it. Okay. Dominant alleles dominant alleles can also encode proteins that carry out toxic reactions. So instead of carrying out the correct reaction, carries out like some weird toxic reaction that can cause an interference. Okay. Dominant alleles can also encode a protein that is overactive or is active at the wrong time and place. So it doesn't have, again, the correct function. So I mentioned in class, and here it is again, the most famous of our dominant disorders is Huntington's disease. Okay. Huntington's disease causes a slow progressive deterioration in parts of the brain. So it's a neurodegenerative disease. Loss of coordination, flailing movements, personality disturbances, and eventually death. The disease kind of kicks in young adulthood, sometimes in the early 20s, but usually in the 30s and 40s. But basically that allows you long enough to reproduce before it kicks in, and this is how it continues to exist in the population. The gene codes for a protein called Huntingtin, and we don't really know what Huntingtin does, but it does seem to do the interference pattern. It interferes with the Huntingtin and to form large aggregates in nerve cells that kill the nerve cells. Okay. All right, so that's our dominant disorders, and now we're going to look at some sex-linked genetic disorders. And sex-linked genetic disorders, if you remember the screencast on sex-linked genes, they function the same as all sex-linked genes, okay, because males only have one X chromosome. If they have a gene for a sex-linked disorder, it is going to be exhibited. So most sex-linked diseases tend to occur in males. Okay. And a couple of the ones we talked about, color blindness, but hemophilia is another sex-linked genetic disorder. So color blindness isn't really considered a disease, but hemophilia is. Okay. So hemophilia is a recessive allele on the X chromosome. It's very rare to get females who are hemophiliacs, but very common to get males who are. It is a deficiency in one of the proteins needed for blood clotting. Okay, so they have anemia because of blood loss. They bruise very easily. The hemophilia gene was passed a lot among the royal families of Europe. We're going to look at the Romanovs in a second. But because back then it was, all the royals married other royals, sometimes cousins married cousins, sometimes closer relatives got married and mated, because it was thought that it would be appropriate to keep the royal blood pure. But what they were really doing is enriching themselves in all kinds of wacky genetic disorders. So here are my Romanovs, okay? And here's good old Victoria, Queen of England. She passed it on to her munchkins, one of whom was, here we go, Alice, okay, Princess of Hesse. And then she had Alexandra Tsarina, and she married Nicholas II of Russia. And then That's Prince Alexei, and you look, here's Anastasia. We all know her, the mysterious disappearing princess. These guys were all when they murdered the royal family. And here's those crazy Romanovs. But it shows you again, it's because all the royals married each other. The instance of the genetic disorder, the X-linked disorder, is very, very common in this family tree. And you'll see it pretty much always occurs in boys, and it's passed on from a carrier mother to her son. Carrier mother to her son. Carrier mother to her sons. Twice. Okay, carrier mother to her sons. Okay, mother, son. Okay. All right. Oh, yay, my favorite, non-disjunction. So that's it for sex linkage. And so we're going to look at some other ways that genetic disorders can be caused by just having abnormal numbers of chromosomes. And we've talked about this a little bit with trisomy 21, Down syndrome, but we're going to look at what causes this. And what causes this is a phenomenon called non-disjunction. And you see this is a double negative, non-disjunction. So the chromosomes do not disjoin, and disjoin is to come apart, but they don't do that. So the homologs, either during anaphase 1 or anaphase 2, they don't separate as they should. They stay together. So either you get the homologous chromosomes stay together in anaphase 1, or the chromatids stay together in anaphase 2. And that gives you extra copies of chromosomes. So you'll have some gametes with too many copies of a chromosome, and some gametes with too few copies of chromosomes, or none at all. Okay. Most embryos that arise from fusion of these gametes, the gametes are fine. Okay. But fusion of gametes, most of them spontaneously abort, but some survive to birth and beyond. Okay. So this is just looking at how chromosomes happen in a normal meiosis. And if you look, here's non-disjunction during meiosis 1. So basically this homologous pair doesn't split. They both go over to this gamete here. And so we have, we're missing a chromosome here, and we have extra chromosomes in this line over here. You can also have non-disjunction during meiosis 2, where the homologous pairs separate fine in meiosis 1, but then in meiosis 2, the sister chromatids don't separate, and you get an extra chromosome in this zygote, this gamete, and don't get enough chromosomes in this gamete. Okay. Some genetics, let's look first, we're going to look at non-disjunction in sex chromosomes. Okay. This can happen in males or females. And so you can get non-disjunction in males producing sperm with either no sex chromosomes, which is a 0, or 2 sex chromosomes. You can get XX, XYY, or XY. And non-disjunction of sex chromosomes in females, you get eggs that are 0 with no sex chromosomes, or XX. Okay. Now, when a normal gamete fuses with the defective sperm or eggs, the ones with extra chromosomes, the zygotes have normal numbers of autosomes, but abnormal numbers of sex chromosomes. Okay, so these are the most common abnormal genotypes: XO, XXX, XXY, and XYY. Some of these fusions do have allow affected individuals to survive. We're going to kind of go through some of the most popular ones now. So Turner syndrome is XO, so females only have 1 X chromosome. The females have hormone deficiencies, so they usually don't menstruate or develop secondary sex characteristics like breasts or body hair. Hormone treatment can fix this. But a lot of these women remain infertile because of the lack of hormones. Okay, Turner syndrome, kind of some additional symptoms: short stature, folds of skin around neck. This is called a webbed neck. increased risk of cardiovascular disease, kidney effects, hearing loss. Okay. And because they only have one X chromosome, Turner syndrome females are more susceptible to recessive disorders such as color blindness or hemophilia. So they will get those X-linked recessive disorders more often. Next genetic disorder, trisomy X. Normal women, okay? Most affected women don't have any symptoms. There can be some increased chance of learning abilities, and sometimes I think they're a little taller. But usually something happens in the eggs to kind of make sure everything is good. And most of those women bear normal children. Okay. Klinefelter syndrome is men with XXY. They have an extra X chromosome. Again, most of these guys have no symptoms. Some may show a little bit of female secondary sex characteristics, breast development, broadening of hips, smaller than average testes. Okay. XXY men, Klinefelter syndrome, are usually infertile because of low sperm count, but they're not impotent. So they can still father children. But they, most of the time, these guys find out they have Klinefelters only when they seek help because they haven't been able to have kids. Okay. Our last genetic disorder we're going to talk about is Jacob syndrome, which is XYY. There's an extra Y chromosome. This gives men with Jacob syndrome very high levels of testosterone. They tend to have severe acne, maybe very, very tall. They think a lot of these kind of like tallest men, Guinness World Record guys, are all sufferers of Jacob syndrome. Okay. Occurs in about 1 in every 1,000 males. Again, not a ton of other characteristics other than slightly increase of learning disabilities. Okay. There are other genetic disorders that are caused by non-disjunction of autosomes. Okay. Non-disjunction of autosomes can occur just as often as non-disjunction of the sex chromosomes, more so. Again, most of the time, if you have single copy autosome embryos, they usually abort very early on. Okay. If you have the gametes with the double copies, fertilize normal sperm and egg, the zygote will have 3 copies. Okay. And the one we talked about here most often that we see is trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. So there's a non-disjunction of chromosome 21. Okay. 1 out of every 800 births is affected with Down syndrome. There's several distinctive physical characteristics, weak muscle tone, small mouth, distinctively shaped eyelids, okay, low resistance to infectious diseases, heart malformations, varying degrees of mental retardation, some that are often actually quite severe, okay. And so here is just an example. Here's those 3 chromosomes, 3 copies of chromosome 21. This is a female. And this is, again, the kind of typical phenotype of a Down syndrome individual. Okay. Now that was kind of fast, kind of just a laundry list of all of our super fun genetic disorders that can be studied with pedigrees. But hopefully you can kind of go back and slow it down. But that is the end. The ended, whatever.